Okay, this is my reaction to Chris Eubank Jr. and Conor Benn. Now, that fight over the weekend between Chris Eubank Jr. and Conor Benn was absolutely epic. I think that every real boxing fan, even though it wasn't for a world title, there was nothing really on the line as far as belts. But every boxing fan, I think, will consider that a classic. The fight's going to go down in history. It adds to the already huge legacy between Eubank and Benn. You know, it was just a legendary night, extremely legendary. Of course, there were so many factors in this fight. You know, my prediction for this fight was to pretty much put every last cent that you had on Eubank. So, of course, with that statement for my prediction, I was extremely nervous watching this fight. Now, there definitely wasn't any losers in this fight. I think both fighters can say they're winners. Conor Benn moved up 2 weight classes and he proved himself a tremendous fighter, not only physically but mentally. I'm going to get on that. I'm going to get on the fight, the performances of both fighters a bit later. First, got to say that the whole build-up to the fight was completely epic. Chris Eubank Sr. making an appearance earlier in the card. I mean, that video, him getting out of the limousine or whatever car that was pretty much like WWE. Iconic video, that one. Him joining Chris Eubank Jr., that ultimately might have got Eubank Jr. the victory. It was just the whole build-up. Chris Eubank Sr. was against the fight, and he really proved in a lot of ways, and I'll explain later as well, how he was totally right about everything. Eubank Sr. was totally right what he said. The whole build-up, it seemed everything was going wrong for Chris Eubank Jr. Everyone, he had a lot of people against him. The promotion, he struggled with weight clearly. He got the fine, and his dad was not talking to him. So the fact that he turned up, that just added so much more to the fight, the event, the build-up. Everything just worked. And the night belonged to Eubank. The entrance for both fighters were good, but the Eubank entrance, I mean, I've definitely been listening to the Still Dre instrumental for the last couple of days. The entrance was fire. Now, on the fight itself, there were 2 things in this fight that I got wrong and I didn't really see coming. The first thing was Conor Benn's performance. Now, Conor Benn, he really hasn't been on a stage where he had to prove himself. He did have a disadvantage in this fight. Clearly, Eubank Jr. was bigger than him. Conor Benn, he was getting backed up in situations where I don't know if he would get backed up if he was fighting someone his size, but one thing's for sure, even though he had the weight disadvantage, I think that he was at his strongest, his sharpest. You're going to have the best punch resistance at a higher weight. So he definitely didn't struggle with anything like that. One thing that impressed me about Conor Benn, and it was really impressive, and I didn't see that coming into this fight. I knew he had tremendous stamina, but he was so explosive. You know, he might be one of the most explosive fighters as far as getting point A to point B in boxing today. He swings hard like his father, Nigel Benn, and he's extremely explosive, probably more explosive than Nigel Benn. But the one thing that Conor Benn doesn't really have is concussive power like his father. I think if he did have that kind of power, he would be one of the hardest fighters to beat in the world, because he does have a great engine and he has a great chin. And one thing he has, you know, before I talk about Chris Eubank Jr. and his performance, Conor Benn definitely has so much heart. He's definitely got the heart of a champion, and he proved it because he got pushed in this fight. I think both fighters, as crazy as it sounds, I mean, they were willing to die in that ring, from what it looked like to me anyway. Conor Benn, he was very tired in the last 2 rounds, and he got hurt, and he was still trying to win the fight, still throwing punches. Both fighters were hitting each other when they were dead tired. It was just crazy, crazy action. I can talk more about Conor Benn, what he's going to do in the future, but as far as Chris Eubank Jr., I didn't think it would be that kind of fight, me seeing Chris Eubank Jr. I thought it would be an easy fight for him. From what I saw, he was completely dead from the weight cut. From basically the whole fight, like round 2, he had no legs. He had no legs, and it got worse and worse as the fight went on. It was very nerve-wracking, especially if you had money on Eubank. You were thinking, I thought the fight would be completely different, because I thought that Eubank would be healthy in this fight. He definitely, in my opinion, was not nowhere near 100%, maybe around 50%, even less. Not only did he not have any legs for this fight, he had no power at all. And he wasn't throwing punches in bunches like he normally does. One of Eubank's best attributes is his combination punching. And because he looked so flat, so tired, no power, honestly, he won the fight just off his heart alone. He was running on empty for the whole fight. I don't know if everybody saw this, because I know Conor Benn's getting a lot of credit for moving up, as he should, because Eubank was still heavier, but Eubank just looked dead. You can tell 100% that the weight cut had an effect on him. That's one thing that his father, Chris Eubank Sr., was saying before the fight, at 35 years old, that he can't make 160 anymore. I think that Chris Eubank Jr., he was just fighting on heart for the entire fight, and man, I think that he definitely proved himself that he is a true warrior. I'm not entirely sure if we're gonna see Chris Eubank Jr. win a world title, but he definitely has the heart of a champion. You know, of course, because it was such a great fight, people are saying, oh, they should rematch, they should do this, but I don't think personally they should rematch. I think that, for one, Chris Eubank Jr. is dead at middleweight. I don't know if he's permanently lost punch resistance or if it's affected him like it has with some fighters. You know, Roy Jones is an example. When he cut weight from heavyweight to light heavyweight after he won the heavyweight title, he was never the same again. He was never that strong fighter again. Eubank Jr., he could very well be in that sort of situation where he's never going to be truly strong again. He could be, which I think that if he does fight again, which I don't think he has any plans to retire, it definitely should be at super middleweight. Chris Eubank Jr. was hurting more from the weight cut than Conor Benn was as far as moving up in weight, for sure. I mean, I wanted Chris Eubank Jr. to win. I did have money on him, a little bit of money on him, but I wanted him to win. Eubank Sr. reunited with his son. I think everybody would agree it was a good feeling to see that. So with that, with the fact that Matchroom really tried to drain Chris Eubank Jr. from the weight, everything was just lining up to a way where Eubank Jr. had to win this fight. And Conor Benn, now as far as what he would do next, I think that he has to be careful. One thing Eubank Sr. was saying a lot for Conor Benn was his promoters could ruin his career. The fact that he moved up and he performed so well against Chris Eubank Jr. I think the fact that Chris Eubank Jr. was so weak in this fight is why Conor Benn performed the way he did. I don't think Conor Benn should fight a real middleweight or a real junior middleweight. I think that Virgil Ortiz, all the top guys at 154 would be extremely hard for Conor Benn, because those fighters can take a punch. Conor Benn, he would be very dangerous against a fighter that doesn't like to get hit. But if a fighter's got good defense, they got a good chin, they're strong, there's a lot of good fighters at the top at 154. So I think the best thing for Conor Benn to do would be to move down to welterweight. But the fact that he was so strong in this fight at 160, he obviously gained muscle. He was super explosive. I think the best physically he ever was. I think cutting from this fight back down to welterweight straight away, I personally think that's not a good idea. He should probably have maybe one fight or two fights at 154 against lower opposition. And then he should fight at 147. Or he should just take a longer break, get his body back down naturally, and then fight at 147. He trains like a madman. He trains like a world champion. I think he definitely has what it takes to be a world champion. If I look at another guy that Eddie Hearn promotes in Jaron Ennis and how Conor Benn would do against him, I think that it would be a difficult fight for Conor Benn. I wouldn't recommend him going straight down and fighting him. I think he needs to fight a few guys beforehand, and then maybe 2 or 3 fights he'd fight Jaron Ennis, once he feels strong at welterweight again. I definitely don't think the rematch should happen, because I think that 168 or super middleweight would be too much for Conor Benn to go to. That wouldn't be fair, because Conor Benn, he's a young guy who's very good, and he has a chance of winning a world title in the future. Him going to super middleweight for this rivalry that, to be honest, I think it's at bed now. I think that there's no real bad blood between Eubanks and the Benns. I think there is bad blood between the Hearns and the Eubanks. Whether or not Chris Eubank Jr. wins a world title in the future, he's definitely a legend in UK boxing. He definitely has the spirit, the heart of a champion. Can he win a world title at this stage in his life? 35, he came off just one of the toughest, absolutely the toughest fight of his life against Conor Benn. Not so much because of Conor Benn, and Conor Benn was great, more so that it was a war and he was weight cut for this war. I think if he stays at 160, Chris Eubank Jr., it's going to be bad for him. If he fights a middleweight champion after this fight, I think it'd be bad. He needs to have maybe 1 or 2 fights at super middleweight, and then he needs to fight for a world title. And I think that would close the chapter on his career, because that's basically the last thing that he needs to do. And it's going to be tough. I think that he's still going to be a legend in boxing, even if he doesn't win a world title. He could possibly have 1 or 2 more money fights after he wins a world title. He could do it beforehand. Me personally, as a fan, I'd rather see him challenge himself for a world title. But there's definitely Billy Joe Saunders and Kell Brook that he can fight. Kell Brook, sort of similar to Conor Benn. He's a bit too small. He wouldn't be fighting at super middleweight. Billy Joe Saunders is obviously not in the best shape at the minute, so Eubank Jr. should move up to super middleweight, fight maybe 1 or 2 guys, then fight for a world title, and then maybe Billy Joe Saunders after that. As far as Conor Benn, I think that he should gradually move down to welterweight, maybe in 2 fights. Yeah, I mean, as far as the fight goes, even though I don't want to see a rematch, it was one of the best fights in the modern era. Non-stop action. I've said this so many times, but every lesson in life comes from boxing or fighting. And if you got nothing left in the tank and you still continue to fight, that's the peak level of the heart for a man, is fighting. That fighting spirit is amazing, and it's inspiring, especially watching that performance. Both fighters, like I said, are winners. Both fighters have that true warrior spirit. Both fighters did the fathers proud. No real losers in this fight, except for maybe Eddie Hearn.